Hello, listeners. It's Coach Tarek, host of the Purpose-Driven Movement podcast, and I've got another special guest today for this special episode. All of them are particularly special, and I'm happy to have Jason from SPREN join me today to discuss a fascinating piece of technology that really caught my attention, particularly as Jason reached out a few months ago. And we're going to dive into what SPREN is about, the technology that I think is a game changer, particularly the personalization element, which I think is a must in this sort of tech AI world. So Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tarek. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you having me on. And also that, we share a connection where you've gone way deeper, but I have this really deep personal interest in the topics that you cover and the things that you teach about with regards to movement and connecting all of these different systems together. So yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you said that because it really frames up our conversation. And one of the things and the principles, I suppose, of purpose-driven movement and the podcast and my philosophies is how do we achieve integration in our life, but also in business. And when it comes to coaching, it's all about how can we make the coach more integrative in their approach, particularly their perspectives. And so we have all of these different perspectives that the coach needs to consider, their own perspective, the client's perspective, other coaches' perspectives when it comes to kind of understanding knowledge and information. In this day and age, fastly evolving, very rapid transitions, some people feel like they're left behind. Some people are afraid to embrace various technologies and AI because, some people are what they would call purists and would rather have that human element purely and maybe they think less of data tracking, for example, right? Whereas you get other folks who'd be the other end of the spectrum. So I'm fascinated to understand and unpack that with you and much, much more. But firstly, as always is important, is your story that sparked SPREN into life, wherever you'd like to begin.
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, you don't end up kind of where I am by accident. It ended up, there were many fortuitous, lucky events that allowed me to get here, but I think it comes from, again, this deep interest in the body, the mind, how it works together as a system, how it interacts with the rest of the world. And as a former athlete that then kind of like stalled out in my early 20s and things got harder and things started breaking down, I had a lot of really personal, journey type story to go through with my health and my performance. But then, to kind of cut some of the extra calories out of the story, I guess you could say, is, I basically saw this gap where many parts of the world have all these tools and systems to do preventive care, preventive maintenance, and monitoring systems and things like that. I saw this in the oil industry when I worked in the oil industry, but it felt like we didn't have that as much for our bodies and for things like preventive health or performance optimization and things like that. And so I kind of became fascinated by that a little over 10 years ago, kind of went down the rabbit hole and ended up creating a company called Elite HRV, which is a heart rate variability focused product, and put it out to the world along with some educational content. And really it kind of attracted a lot of attention. And again, one of the big lucky breaks, I guess you could say, for me is that I was in the right place at the right time for HRV. And lots of people were looking for help with HRV. And so I ended up being able to consult with some of the top sports organizations in the world, and also on the other end of the spectrum, some medical and health-driven practices that were, trying to help people with chronic or, acute health conditions. And so this all kind of just snowballed into the genesis of SPREN, which is what I've been focused on for the past few years, where we've innovated ways to make tracking data like HRV and now body composition easier while retaining the accuracy and quality using just your phone as the sensor. And so we can get into all of that, of course, but basically this was kind of just a high-level overview of some of the steps that got me here today, as I just saw that there were gaps in the market on getting insights out of the body and making them accessible to more people.
So really, it came from a really direct experience and having this sort of professional perspective in the mining sector where you were looking to enhance and optimize one's health and obviously to make sure that that person, that individual, maintains that healthiness to be able to work because of obviously insurance, and you have an unhealthy worker who can't perform work. There's obviously a big cost to that. So it seemed like you were doing important work in the mining sector there, and then you worked with athletes to kind of look at individualizing and look at sort of habits, and all of this sort of confluated into something like quite unique, which is SPREN, which I think is quite fascinating. So I love that fact that you've brought your background experience into this sort of text-based to make sense of the next steps of interpreting data and beyond that as well, which we'll get into, that sort of human element that SPREN still kind of understands. It's the why and the who that really technology, I think, can't replace.
Yeah. And the landscape's moving really fast, like you said earlier. And so it's an exciting time to be involved in this. And also just there's so many people that need help. And so it's an exciting time from the standpoint of feeling a deep sense of purpose as I work on all of this stuff. The things that I learned in the oil industry were tremendously valuable for me and my career. And it was about people first, but also about the equipment. There's a lot of money and a lot of investments that are made in the whole operations there. But the most important piece of equipment that we have is our body. And so that's kind of, again, just it resonated to be able to move in this direction with my career.
Yeah, brilliant. And so talk us through the features of SPREN, and let's dive into kind of the key elements of it.
Sure, yeah. So basically, as I learned in the early part of my career, and then as I translated into now, is when you're looking at a system and you want to maintain or improve that system, then you usually do a couple of things. And so I'll get it a little less philosophical. I'll start to get a little more specific, but start with assessments. Then you form some plans of action. For us as health and wellness and fitness practitioners, we need to do things, and then we need to have behavioral support, and we need to have some actions that take place. So SPREN, one of our early innovations is assessment tools to assess the body. Again, using the camera of your phone, you can assess body composition and metabolic markers, which we can get into specific details of that, and also cardiorespiratory markers like heart rate, HRV, and respiration, and eventually things like VO2 max are in the pipeline as well. And we integrate with things like blood labs and other data that people might be tracking. And we pull all of that together to try to give you a comprehensive view of you, basically as easily and conveniently and cheaply as we possibly can, while still keeping the quality very high, which we can talk about accuracy and quality and all that stuff. But then just again, connecting the dots real quick is that all of this data is very, very important, but it's only really useful if you can translate it into action. And so we have tools to support coaches and practitioners and then individuals who are on their own journey to form plans of action that are personalized to them, personalized to each individual. Because I think one of the other exciting trends is that as an industry, we've talked about personalization for a long time, and it's never really been able to be delivered upon in a scalable way. And now that we're seeing more automation and more of this kind of emerging technology, we're actually able to start delivering on personalized plans. Then the third piece is behavioral support. How do you then translate this plan to fit into your life so that you can execute the plan and follow through with it? And then it all comes full circle, because at the end, you need to reassess and see if you've made progress or not. And if not, it's not a shameful thing. There's no such thing as linear progress, but you need to kind of check in and see, is this working for me? And if not, let's adjust course and adjust some of the variables.
Thanks, Jason, for covering off briefly the three elements of SPREN. And from your understanding in your teams, how does this technology sort of differ to what's out there? What's the USP? What's unique about it from, obviously your perspective?
Yeah, no, definitely. So, a lot of people are really attracted to our camera technology. And so, I briefly touched on that. We could do body composition, metabolic markers, cardiorespiratory markers, but, you can get those markers by going into a lab or doing a DEXA scan or, getting some type of hardware device, and wearables actually provide things like heart rate and HRV as well. So coming back to the USP, our goal is we've been a very open platform since the beginning. Our goal is not to create a walled garden where you can only get you can only work with our stuff and nobody else's stuff. So one of the unique selling points is that if you have a wearable or you are tracking things in other places, we're happy happy to bring that in and feed it into your whole decision support system. If you need more convenience or you're looking for a different way to measure things like body composition, for example, let's dig into that one. You could go get a DEXA scan in a lot of major cities around the world, especially in the US. You can find one anywhere in a major city for like $150, $250, something like that. And that gives you a PDF packet, with some information and some reference ranges. And if you're very lucky, somebody will explain to you what it all means. But since you have to go to a lab and schedule an appointment, and then you get this packet of paper, you basically only do this maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Some people who are very dedicated do it a few times a year. What we do is we take all of that and we package it into your phone. So now it's a pretty unique innovation in the sense that accuracy and the quality is comparable to a DEXA scan. You can get body fat percentage, lean mass, so looking at your muscle and lean tissues, and then the indexes of those. And you can see fat and muscle distribution around the body and understand your resting metabolic rate, all just using your phone and no other hardware, no appointments needed, no lab needed. So people are doing that much more cheaply than going into a lab, and also more frequently. On average, people do it once a week. And so this just kind of unlocks this cascade of opportunities that you didn't have before, which is one of our goals, and allows you to kind of calibrate things like nutrition, for example, on a weekly basis instead of on an annual basis, for example.
Yeah, got you. And touching on that, on the DEXA scan on Element for a moment, Jason, there might be the question asked, like, how did you sort of gather the level of accuracy comparable to a DEXA through basically scanning with your phone? Can you maybe explain that a little bit just for the listeners?
Yeah, it's a pretty involved process. It took us several years and millions of dollars of R&D to figure that out. And basically, we had thousands and thousands of volunteers do DEXA scans and take images of their body using their phone, all voluntarily, of course, participating in research. And we studied that data. We developed algorithms for detecting, different features of the body, and also applied machine learning and deep learning to this ground truth data set of thousands and thousands of scans. And eventually, we're able to predict, essentially, it's an estimate of these values like body fat percentage and lean mass and fat and muscle distribution. So what's really interesting is you can have a really deep understanding of physiology and even of body composition. But if you're working in a lab and you only have a few dozen participants or maybe a few hundred participants, there's just not enough data there to be able to train algorithms and models that are robust enough to detect these features accurately for many people out in the real world. So that's why it took us several years and millions of dollars, because it was basically like figuring out how it all works, developing the algorithms, understanding the limitations of cameras and sensors and lighting and all of this type of stuff, while also building in a user experience that allows people to do it really easily on their own without having a professional need to oversee that scan, and then also making it accurate for a wide variety of people in a wide variety of conditions. So that's kind of a lot of the work that went into it. And where it was a big kind of leap of faith, I have to say, because it wasn't clear that we would be able to do it. I'm pretty optimistic when it comes to technology, and I, was pretty convinced that we could do it. That's why I invested so much of my time and our team's time, and then we invested a lot of money into it. But we've been very excited about the result because, the accuracy and reliability is basically second to none.
Yeah, and you said thousands of scans, so that's pretty amazing across thousands of bodies, I presume, as well, and obviously different lean muscle mass and so forth. And yeah, it's very interesting. And that was that in the guise of pilot study or a series of actual scientific studies in terms of collecting that data or surveys or both?
Yeah, both. One of the things that we feel grateful for is that our community that we've built up over 10 years is excited to be on this journey with us. And so we get a lot of people who volunteer for research, just because they've been part of our community and our story for a long time, and we've continued to develop tools to make their lives easier. And so we're grateful for that. But then also, yes, in participation with research labs, we've worked with over 100 different universities and research labs over the years. We're really grateful for the input from the scientists and researchers in those labs, but also the tools work really well for them. So it's kind of a win-win. They can use our tools in their research, which makes their research cheaper but keeps the quality high and allows them to collect data that they couldn't have collected before because they can reach people remotely, for example. And so we get a lot of really strong collaboration from the research community. And so you'll see too, I think we have a few of the studies published on our website at SPREN.com, and then we're publishing some of the recent ones that are also really exciting validations of the technology.
And that's just incredible. Yeah, I love hearing this because, and you said it before, to get that sort of data set to then punch it into the AI and get those necessary algorithms to create accurate outcomes or data. I think that's really amazing. The other points are the non-invasiveness of it. I think for some people getting scans is a bit of a scary thing in some ways, and also the convenience, and probably thirdly the cost, right? So to be able to scale this, or if someone wants to do this multiple times, they're not forking out maybe hundreds of dollars, and as you said earlier, spending a lot of time getting these scans. I mean, this is only one element that we've touched on in terms of the scan. If we focus then on the nutrition and sort of that component, can you talk a little bit about sort of, SPREN's feature in and around nutrition?
Yeah. So, we think of nutrition very holistically. And so we have built out this framework that over time is going to continue to add more and more into the nutrition guidance component of our platform. But today, we focused on the things that really directly connect to body composition first, because for one, they're slightly less controversial. You may have heard this quote. It's kind of funny that some people said it's easier to change your religion than it is to change your diet. There's one thing that I think is becoming pretty clear, and a lot of people are really centering around, which is getting adequate protein and adequate fiber, and also, essentially not overeating. Eating enough to reach your performance needs, but not so much that it creates an excess load on the body. And so that's what our initial nutrition feature is focused on. And what we do is, again, we come back to that loop that we talked about earlier, where you can assess your body composition, then you can link all of your data so we can see activity, sleep, recovery, stress, maybe glucose data if you're tracking that, et cetera. And then feed all of that data and body composition assessment data into a personalized nutrition plan that generates protein, calorie, and macro targets for you for daily targets that are in support of your goals. And so it's very personalized. It's more personalized really than anything available on the market, unless you're working with a nutritionist, because this is actually what nutritionists do, is they have you do these assessments, they compile all this data, and they come up with targets. But somebody might be like, oh, well, are you trying to replace nutritionists? And the answer is actually no. Coaches and practitioners really love our tools because it automates kind of the worst part of their job, which is crunching all these numbers, basically. And so then they can focus more on connecting with the individual, building a relationship with them, helping understand, their life and how they're going to implement this plan, which is actually the 99.9% of what matters. But we also provide tools that support that as well. So one example of that is food logging. So we integrate with food logging apps if people want to log their food, but we've also built it natively into the platform because we want to just make it as seamless and easy for people as possible. And so we've built in some AI native food logging where you can just talk to your phone or text with it and say, I just had a smoothie that had a banana and a scoop of protein powder and a handful of spinach and a pinch of sea salt, or, whatever it is that people want to put in there. You can actually just say that to your phone. The AI will go look it up in the database and pull it all up for you and see, is this look accurate? And you can check it off and say, yep, looks good, and it'll log it for you. So then you can start tracking that behavior a little bit more easily and feed that back into the system to say okay, now that you've been doing this, here's how it's impacting your body composition. And then the plan will automatically adapt whether it's working or not working for you, or maybe you can do a little bit more, a little bit less of something here and there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because one of the key elements of habit formation is, making it easy and making it visible as well. So, if you simply speak into the phone, into the app, as it were, then that will gather all of that data and input it, which, I recall years back as a trainer, I'd say to my clients, okay, so I want you to track this, this and that and write this. Okay, they might do that for the first 2 or 3 days, but then it just becomes too much. And this is for a lot of people. There are some diligent ones who, they'd come back to me and say, hey, look what I've done in 30 days, and they're very detailed. But for a lot of people, tracking it in that old-fashioned way, which works for some, as pointed out, it sort of takes that edge off it as well. So I think it's really important to make things easy, which is what you're alluding to at the moment. And the other point that I think is stark is that you mentioned it's not meant to replace the nutritionist or the coach. Again, I think for the listeners to kind of really hear this point is that it's really to make things efficient, take the laborious elements, chunks of the what, maybe elements of the how. But one crucial thing that you mentioned is it doesn't replace the identity, the relational elements, the why, the purpose, and all of those components really, really make for a meaningful outcome or interaction between, the coach, client, as it were, or that group. So I think that to me stands out as the pinnacle. Now, what are some of the key elements that kind of allow more accessibility for the coach, the personal trainer, for example, whether it's what we've talked about thus far, which is the scans, the nutritional components, which might speak more to a nutritionist, but then the trainer, who's usually the guide by the side of that client. What are some of the other elements that kind of make it easier in a sense and more efficient for that coach as they relay information to their clients?
Yeah. So, basically you touched on some really good points there, one of which is the relationship. And that is like a really massive component of coaching, is building a relationship with the client. And, some coaches joke that eventually you become the person's therapist. Oftentimes their friend too. A lot of people become really great friends with their coach because you just spend so much time together and you share so openly so much of your life with them. And so, in any case, that's often, maybe more the case for like smaller groups or personal training, maybe not always the case with like a large group fitness or something like that. Nothing wrong with that, but just trying to highlight all those components. And in any case, so one of the things that a coach who has gained experience after doing coaching for some time learns, and they always nod their head when I say this, is that you often will get like 90% of the questions are kind of the same questions over and over again. And so they're just like slightly different based on the context of somebody's life, right? And so it might be like, you tell somebody, okay, here's your protein goal. And they're like, okay, great. And sometimes they'll say, that's easy, or that's going to be really hard, whatever. People have some sort of intuitive reaction to something like a protein goal. But then when they actually go to lunch the next day and they go to a cafe and they look at the menu and they're like, oh crap, I don't actually know what to order on this menu. Is this too much? Is this too little? What of these things should I order? Right. And most people can't just call their coach every time they eat and be like, hey, coach, I'm looking at these options here. Which one should I order? And you can do some Googling or some chat GPTing or some, looking things up on your own, and you can kind of piece these things together. But we provide tools that automate all of that for you and basically say, a coach can kind of say, here's how I think about eating or moving or, managing a health and fitness journey. They can actually program that into the system. And then there's AI behavioral support tools built into SPREN that will answer those kind of routine questions according to the philosophy of the coach. And so it may be like, one coach might say, hey, if you just prioritize whole foods that are minimally processed, then, that's a great start. Focus on that. Another coach might be like, hey, the level of processing of a food doesn't matter too much as long as you hit the macro targets or something like that, right? And, like I have my own personal philosophies on those subjects, but I think it's more powerful to let the coach kind of steer in one of those directions or the other because part of the reason why the client is coming to them is because of their connection to them and this feeling that this program or this coach is going to work for me because the things that they say make sense to me in my life.
And they're an authority of sorts, and it's that trusted authority. And it's kind of like what comes to mind, Jason, is like the coach is in the client's pocket, so it's kind of like you fed that in. And what does coach say about this? And which I think is pretty cool. It's like the coach becomes that voice that they've already connected and trusted with. So I really love that, to make things, again, really efficient. And it's understandable that the client will go, well, hang on, it's overwhelming, or, there's a barrier of just fear around, or just having enough of trying to decide, because that's consuming, right? That's energy. So I think, again, all of this leads to making it accessible, making it easy, and really providing a means for that client to kind of focus on the important things, I think, and not get caught up on maybe some of the nuances that don't really matter, at least for that client. So it's easy for them to get overwhelmed and maybe just end the journey, right? So, and the coach and all the client would benefit, in that sense. So it sounds like all of those things can lead on to this really longevity of journey between the coach and the client, rather than the fear of, hang on, that client could do it on their own. So is there anything that did you want to talk to that point in particular, in terms of that the coach is still becomes somewhat of that trusted source? They don't become maybe lazy, that there's still effort required, but there's this efficiency that seems to be built in, tantamount to the effort, i.e. expertise and so on.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to kind of at the beginning, I was like, so many people need help. And I always tell people, if you can afford to work with a coach or a practitioner or have somebody guide you in a more hands-on way, you should. I've been a coach since, for over a decade, and I have a coach for me as well. And I feel grateful to be able to afford that. And in fact, you can see this in sports. The more elite an athlete becomes, the more coaches they have, actually, not the fewer. You would think the best athlete in the world was like, they know everything. They don't need a coach, right? But that's just the opposite. And so I think anyone that can afford it should have one. And also, because so many people could benefit from it, coaching is expensive. That's one of the barriers for people to hire a coach, is that they may not always be able to afford it. But also for the coach, it's hard to scale your time, right? Because you really need to put a lot of time into your clients, your members, your athletes, et cetera, to get them what they're looking for. What we want to do is provide tools that allow coaches to scale themselves a little bit more, reach more people while keeping the quality of their service high. And hopefully that gives more people access to great quality coaching. And so, maybe over time it will drive the price down for people who are looking for coaching as well, without making it harder on the coach. Like, we want the coach to make a great living too.
Yeah, you've got a good point. And that's where scalability and being able to help more people, as it were. So it kind of works bi-directionally. And on that note, what would you say would be the key usability features from an interface perspective, from a client's perspective, but also a coach's perspective with SPREN? Can you just maybe talk to those key points?
Yeah. So this is an area that we've been more recently building out. So we have a lot of stuff that we're excited to build. We're builders. I mean, I think you may have got this vibe already, but we get excited about building, cool things, so to speak.
And it always evolves, right? That's a key point. It's ever evolving.
Yeah. You start to hear this quote, because AI is all over the news all the time. And it's really bringing the whole tech, kind of how tech companies operate. It's bringing that culture into the awareness of everyone now. And what they like to say in those AI interviews is, today the product you're using is the worst that it'll ever be, because it's always evolving, it's always improving, and the system is always going to be better tomorrow than it is today. And so in any case, so that is the case here as well. But for coaches, what we decided to do was focus on trying to provide some automation tools that would not require a bunch of their time. And so what we do when we partner with coaches and practitioners is we actually interview them and understand kind of their philosophies and approaches to different parts of the health and wellness or performance journey that they care about. And then we put that into a secure repository where that's theirs, and they end up getting their own little AI support, which they oftentimes they'll name it after themselves, which kind of makes sense. It's basically their assistant coach, so to speak. And so it will then be able to answer questions to their members and clients automatically 24/7. And if it doesn't know, or it's like not sure, it will say, hey, like you need to talk to coach about that. But it does end up taking a lot of load off of them for a lot of those kind of repetitive and routine support needs. Right now, there's no way to actually connect that. Just being candid and open about where the state of the world is, it can't connect back to the coach yet. So the coach can't read all of those conversations or see all of those conversations. It's happening on automation between the client and the AI, but the AI has access to all of that client's data. And so can say like, hey, if you do a body composition analysis and your android gynoid ratio changes by 0.1, a lot of people are like, what the heck does that mean? And some coaches might be like, don't worry about that at all. It maybe isn't relevant to you or your goals. And other coaches might be like, hey, this is a really important metric we need to pay attention to because of, the context of you and your goals, basically. And so that's kind of what's neat about the system is it's very flexible for serving a lot of these different cases while being very personal to every client. So that's kind of what's available today is a coach can train up in their own AI that's represents them and kind of provides that assistant coach type feel. It's not a medical advisor or a coach itself, so it often will defer to, the main coach or practitioner for, serious things. But for routine questions and data, helping understand the data and things like that, it's a great partner.
Yeah, I love that because, in the end, this type of tool, it could make one magnanimous, bigger than they actually think they are. So it's important that that point be made is that there is a bridge and obviously there's scope of practice that we talk about in the industry. So a fitness professional, personal trainer would have a scope of practice. They're not going to be regarded unless they've got that qualification as what you'd call a physical therapist in the States or a physiotherapist in Australia or a nutritionist, but they have scope of practice. So it sounds like that's an important facet of SPREN. So there will be certain limits or deferred, as you would say. But how I see this working, and you touched on this earlier, is bridging the medical and the preventative health. Whereas, do you see it working quite powerfully where there's an allied health element where, let's say, the trainer goes and works in with a doctor to actually input those data entry points, blood pressure and cholesterol, and all of those, blood samplings and you name it. Is that where SPREN will eventually evolve, where there's all these data point entries that the doctor can input, for example, the GP and the trainer and the nutritionist, and it becomes almost like this pooling?
Yeah, this is a great question, Tarek, honestly, and I appreciate you connecting those dots because I think it's one of the most exciting frontiers, I guess, of these different industries is seeing them all come together. And, holistic health or holistic performance, these types of words are things that are being talked about. And then they often kind of get branded in different ways like longevity or biohacking or, different labels that get put on topic.
But show us some working solutions. Yeah. Like what are some of the working solutions? Yeah.
Right. So, but what you can always do, and I kind of have fun doing this as a thought exercise, is think, what do top athletes have access to and what do billionaires have access to, right? And they don't have just like one person helping them, on that journey. They have a team, right? And so they've got people who understand nutrition, people who understand exercise science, people who understand sleep and recovery, and then they have sports specific training. Or if they're, again, the billionaire might be like, having somebody with clinical psychology for high performing individuals or, something like that. Eventually, I see everyone getting access to this level of care that's holistic and addresses the medical side, both reactively, preventively, and predictively, as well as the, wellness and fitness part of the continuum, and then even the performance and productivity part of the continuum. To me, as I've learned about all this and studied physiology and biomarkers and everything, I just have seen it as all one continuum. It's basically we have our body, our mind, our spirit, depending on what people want to think of as the whole self. And whether you're struggling to overcome a health issue or you're struggling to eke out a little bit more performance, the levers are often the same. It's just how and to what degree you make changes to them, essentially. And so pulling them all together into one place or being able to start doing that is a really exciting part of this journey for us.
Yeah, you've summed up how we framed the conversation was integrative or holistic, and I'm really loving this. That's one point that I wanted to make, because it seems like that SPREN's has evolved and evolving in this fashion where it's inclusive in a sense of the manner of professionals coming together and being able to kind of work in with that client for that client's purpose and benefit and outcome. So always, thinking about that client first, or that, patient client, however that terminology becomes fashioned. But ultimately, it's that human being that they're dealing with. And so if they can sort of come together and work together, that network becomes that person's net worth, right? That coach. So rather than the coach, as you put it, trying to do it on their own, they can align and network with other professionals who it's going to be in the best interest for that client in this respect that we're discussing, as well as medically as well. If they do see a GP and they're managing, conditions, acute or chronic, whatever it might be, whereas some clients may not need that. So I love how there's this ecosystem where there's these professionals that come together for the common good, which is that client's well-being. And I love how therefore those data entry points can also, kind of come together to make sense for that client, make sense for that coach and those professionals. So this sounds like a really fascinating tool. One other question I did have, Jason, is the entry points from watches like Garmin. So again, one of the key features I can see, or USPs even, is that APIs that aren't native can be actually integrated into this app. So how does it work with Garmin and Apple and all data entry points that come from wearables in that sense?
Yeah. So, basically, like I mentioned, we've always been sort of an open platform. We're happy to integrate with anyone, essentially. Obviously, we have limited time and resources just like anyone else does. So we prioritize the more popular devices and integrations first, just because they help more people. But in any case, if you have an Apple Watch or a Garmin watch, and if you're sending that data into Apple Health, or you're approving to link your account, basically we can pull that data in, and it depends a little bit on the other party on what they allow to be pulled in. But for most devices, I think now what we're seeing is that the cultural zeitgeist around things like data portability is pressuring companies to be more open with the data, which is ultimately good. And being able to track and then take your data wherever you want is better for the consumer. It's better for the member, the patient, the client. So many words to represent this human.
Truly, and there's so much more we can discuss. But the way that you've explained it, the way that we talked about it in our first conversation, and what I've seen of it so far, the front end of the platform, because admittedly I haven't used it yet, but I have gone into the platform, and from what you're sharing, it's remarkable. It seems like there's a soul to this SPREN, this technology, if I could call it that, which is the coach and the community component. Would that be sort of a good way to summarize what we've discussed? That, because again, it's like not a dead thing. From what you're sharing, it's not a dead kind of technology. It's got a soul to it where that human being comes in, obviously, as the purveyor of it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a high compliment. And yes, I think about it that way. To some degree, we on the team, all of us, feel like we are personally vested, the journey that all of our members are on. And so that kind of comes through. Even I'll give a shout out to Shannon, who champions our customer support team and has been a coach for a long time, ran gyms. And when people email in to the help desk to ask like that they forgot their password or something, and they interact with the team, they come away thinking like, wow, like there's real people behind this that really care and really are here to help me find and reach my goals, whether it's the simple things or hard things. And I think that kind of culture that we've been building internally as a team has kind of like rippled out into all of our partnerships and into the community. And we have a very active community of people trying to help each other as well. So there's other, lots of people who are on similar journeys to each other and reaching out to each other and trying to encourage each other and answer each other's questions and stuff. So all of this stuff, all this tech is really just facilitating a lot of connections between people. And the one journey that I think binds all people together is health and wellness and performance. And so, not to go too far off into the philosophical side of or political side of all this, but I just think that another part of our mission that underlies all this is the world is really full of a lot of troubling things. So, from discrimination and war and like financial stress and like hate and all these different things that are roiling around in the world, it feels like health is one of those things that ties us all together and that we all need to work on it. Whether you have this political view or that political view, like your health is going to be this similar journey to people on one side of the table or the other. And healthier people make better decisions. Healthier people are more forgiving. Healthier people have more energy to give to each other. And so to us, it's kind of a really purpose-driven venture here that we have.
You sound like that, doesn't it? Purpose-driven, where yeah, you're on the podcast, the right podcast then, Jason. Just joking. Yeah, and it sort of harkens back to again, being a bit philosophical here, but going a bit deep, that light and dark kind of exists within us. And you may have heard the old Cherokee story of the wolf, the dark and the white wolf, right? That exists within us. And so which one wins is the one that we feed the most. And so, that the whole idea of good and evil spreading from within, I think, is quite valid. So again, it comes down to our choices, our healthy choices, for example. Are we going to consume this, watch too much TV, or be it, and really monitor the level of stimulus, right? And it's even, the technologies that we consume to actually remove oneself from that and get back into nature, for example. We could keep going on, but I think the important thing here is that the philosophical underpinnings of SPREN are really important. They really shine as well, and they've resonated for me, and I'm sure they will resonate for the listeners. And on that note, Jason, how does someone access SPREN? Is there a trial? Is it a high cost? Just sort of run through how someone can basically access it.
For sure. Yeah. SPREN.com, SPREN.com. You can find a lot of great information there and sign up there if you want. You can also find it in the App Store. We were on Android and we paused that recently because we were fixing some things for Android to be back there very soon. But basically, you can go get access to it. A lot of the stuff that we put out is free. And that's part of our mission to make it more accessible to more people. If you like it, we have some subscriptions with some premium features and things like that in there. We also have a lot of partnerships. So that's a big area of excitement for us because on the journey of improving health or performance, like I kind of mentioned, the data is this important piece, but it's a very small piece of the pie. And so another reason why partnerships are so exciting to us is because we can't be the experts on everything. And so we really need our partners to help people get the results they're looking for. So we partner with coaches, practitioners, gyms, health clubs, a variety of different products and services from supplements to other things to try to provide everything that the person needs on that journey. And in any case, so some of our stuff you can only find through our partners, but you can find who those are on our websites. If you're curious if your gym integrates with SPREN, you can check on SPREN, but also feel free to point them in our direction because we'd be happy to integrate with them.
We'll have some links and some more information in the show notes. Really appreciate, Jason, your openness and, of course, the uniqueness of SPREN and sharing the fact that it is an open source and it's an exciting one that's evolving and quite inclusive from a health and wellness perspective. And I really love the potential that it has in terms of, linking in the community of practitioners, bridging preventative and medical and actually having them coexist, where people are seeing division, so I'm loving where SPREN's heading, and, FTI will definitely be there facilitating and supporting as a partner on this journey. And for those other listeners, if you want to jump on board, free trial, become a potential partner, because this is really exciting and it's a really low barrier to entry for that coach or that practitioner to take up the tool, it seems. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Tarek. Happy to be here. You're doing great work and spreading the good words of all these things. And everything at FTI that I'm learning from you too. So thank you. And thanks to everyone listening.
Thanks, Jason. Hey, fitness enthusiast, can you please do me a huge favor and leave a review or rating, subscribe to the podcast, or share with a friend? These little acts make a huge difference in keeping this show going. Thanks so much.